On the edge of known space, far from Earth and farther still from peace, lay the moon, Bezran 7. It was a dry, cracked place, scarred by war and forgotten by most. Dust storms howled across its surface like ghosts of battles past. Nothing grew there, no trees, no grass, not even weeds. Only metal ruins, broken ships, and the silence of those who had died and were never buried. Corporal Elias Rourke walked through that silence. He was a medic with the United Earth Defense Force, though he hadn't healed anyone in weeks. Not because there were no wounded, but because most of the wounded didn't survive long enough for him to reach them. His uniform was torn at the knee, his boots caked in gray dust, and his eyes tired beyond his 32 years. He carried a rifle, but it hung low at his side. He didn't expect to use it today. This was just a routine patrol, checking the perimeter, scanning for enemy signals, making sure nothing moved where nothing should. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the jagged rocks. Elias moved slowly, his breath fogging the inside of his helmet. The air outside was thin and poisonous, so he kept his visor sealed. Static crackled in his earpiece. "Rourke, you're nearing Sector 9, came the voice of Lieutenant Mara from Base Command. "Thermal shows a heat bloom about 2 clicks east. Could be a downed drone. Could be nothing. Check it out, then head back. Storm's coming." "Copy that," Elias replied, his voice rough from disuse. He adjusted his pack and trudged forward. The ground crunched underfoot, shattered glass maybe, or old ceramic plating from some forgotten battle. As he crested a low ridge, he saw it. A small ship, half buried in the dust, its hull blackened and split open like a cracked egg. Smoke still curled from its engines, thin and gray against the orange sky. Elias approached carefully. No movement. No signs of life. He scanned the area with his wrist-mounted sensor. One faint biosign, weak, flickering. He frowned. Most smugglers or scouts flew alone, but they were usually armed, hardened. This ship looked civilian, small, unarmed, built for speed, not combat. And the biosign, it was too small for an adult. He climbed over the wreckage, boots slipping on melted metal. Inside the cabin was a mess of twisted wires and shattered screens. And there, curled in the far corner, half covered by a torn survival blanket, was a child. She couldn't have been more than 10 Earth years old. Her skin shimmered like wet silver under the dim emergency lights. Her eyes, huge, dark, and filled with terror, locked onto his the moment he stepped inside. Thin lines of soft blue light pulsed along her arms and neck, fading in and out like a dying heartbeat. She clutched a broken pendant in her small hands, shaped like 2 crescent moons facing each other. Elias froze. He knew what she was. Kailari, a species once respected across the galaxy for their knowledge of stars and peacekeeping. But that was before their homeworld fell. Before the war. Now they were labeled non-protected. No rights, no refuge. Just another problem for the military to ignore. His radio buzzed. "Rourke, report. What have you got?" He swallowed. "Civilian craft. 1 survivor. A Kailari?" "Yes," a pause. Then cold and clear, "Leave it. Kailari aren't covered under the Geneva Accords anymore. You know the orders. No aid, no contact. Mark the location and return to base." Elias looked down at the girl. She hadn't moved. Hadn't spoken. But her eyes never left his. In them he saw something he recognized. Fear, yes, but also hope. The kind of hope that only appears when you're at the very end, and someone finally looks at you like you matter. He remembered his little sister back on Earth, lost to fever when he was 12. He'd held her hand as she faded, helpless, just like this. "Rourke?" the lieutenant pressed. "Do you copy?" He took a slow breath. "Copy, marking location now." He switched off his external comms. Just for a moment, then he knelt. Slowly, so as not to scare her, he pulled off his gloves and held out an empty hand. "It's okay," he said softly, though he knew she wouldn't understand Earth words. "I won't hurt you." The girl flinched but didn't look away. Her breathing was shallow, rapid. One of her legs was bent at a wrong angle. Burn marks streaked her shoulder. She was hurt, badly. Elias reached into his med kit and pulled out a thermal blanket, the kind used for shock. He unfolded it gently and laid it beside her. Then he waited. Minutes passed. The wind outside grew louder. Dust swirled through the broken hull. Still, he waited. Finally, with a trembling hand, the girl reached out and touched the edge of the blanket. Then with great effort she crawled toward it, dragging her injured leg. Elias helped her wrap it around her small frame, careful not to touch her unless she allowed it. She looked up at him again. This time the blue lines on her skin glowed a little brighter. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from or why she was alone. But he knew one thing: if he left her here, she would die. And no one would care. His radio crackled again. "Rourke, storm's moving faster. Get back now." He stood, made his decision, and lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, fragile as glass. She let out a small sound, half whimper, half sigh, and buried her face in his shoulder. "Sorry, Lieutenant," he muttered into his mic, switching it back on. "Got a medical emergency." Bringing her in. "What?" "Rourke, that's a direct—" He cut the transmission. The wind screamed as he walked back toward base. The girl held close against his chest. The sky darkened. Lightning flickered in the distance. But for the first time in months, Elias didn't feel alone. He didn't know what would happen when he got back. Court-martial, maybe. Discharge. Worse. But as the girl's faint warmth seeped through his uniform, and her breathing steadied against his heartbeat, he knew he'd do it again. Because sometimes, doing the right thing means standing alone, and sometimes that's enough. Back at Forward Operating Base Thorn, the air smelled of oil, sweat, and stale coffee. The base was built into the side of a rocky hill, all metal walls and flickering lights. It was not a place for children, especially not alien ones. Elias carried the girl through the main gate, ignoring the stairs. Soldiers stopped talking. Medics froze in the hallway. Even the base dog, a scruffy mutt named Rex, sat down and watched with wide eyes. "Corporal Rourke," shouted Lieutenant Mara, striding toward him, her face tight with anger. "What is this?" "She's hurt," Elias said simply. "Broken leg, burns, shock." "She's Kalari," Mara snapped. "You know the rules. No non-combatant aliens on base without clearance." "She's a child," Elias said, holding the girl tighter. "Not a soldier. Not a threat." Mara's jaw clenched. She looked at the girl, small, silver-skinned, wrapped in a dirty thermal blanket. And for a second, something flickered in her eyes. Pity, fear, but it vanished fast. "Put her in Medbay 3, she said coldly. "Quarantine protocol. Full isolation. And Rourke, you're on report." Elias nodded. He didn't argue. He just walked to Medbay 3, a small room at the far end of the medical wing, usually used for contagious diseases. The door hissed shut behind him, locking automatically. The room was cold and bare. A cot, a sink, a single overhead light. No windows. Elias laid the girl gently on the cot. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just watched him with those big dark eyes. He cleaned her burns with antiseptic gel, set her leg with a splint from his kit, and gave her water from his canteen. She drank slowly, her hands shaking. When he finished, she pointed to her chest, then to him. "You," she whispered, her voice like wind through glass. "Elias," he said, tapping his chest. She touched her own. "Lyra," he smiled. "Lyra, good name." She tried to smile back, but it was weak. Exhaustion pulled at her eyelids. Soon she fell asleep. That night Elias sat outside the locked door, back against the wall, rifle across his knees. He wasn't supposed to be there. But he stayed anyway. Over the next few days the base changed. Whispers followed Elias wherever he went. Soldiers avoided eye contact. Some muttered behind his back, "Traitor. Fool. She's probably spying for them." No one visited Lyra, not the doctors, not the nurses. Only Elias. He was punished for his disobedience. Stripped of rank temporarily. Assigned to latrine duty. Scrubbing toilets, hauling waste barrels, cleaning up after everyone else. It was meant to shame him. And it did, but he didn't care. Every evening after his shift he returned to Medbay 3. He brought extra rations, soft bread, fruit paste, protein cubes softened with water. At first Lyra barely ate, but slowly she began to trust him. He also brought a small sketch pad and a pencil, things he'd kept since basic training. He drew pictures for her, trees, oceans, dogs, stars. Things she'd never seen. In return, she drew for him. Her drawings were strange and beautiful. Swirling galaxies, twin moons, creatures with wings of light. She pointed to the stars in her drawings and made soft humming sounds. Elias didn't understand her words, but he learned her gestures. A tap on the wrist meant thirsty. A hand over the heart meant safe. A finger tracing a circle on her palm meant remember. They began to teach each other. He pointed to objects and said their names. Cup, light, door. She repeated them in her soft, careful voice. She taught him too, pointing to the blue lines on her skin and saying Kai, which he guessed meant life or light. Days turned into weeks. Lyra's leg healed enough for her to walk with a crutch Elias carved from a broken chair leg. Her burns faded to pale silver scars, and her eyes, once full of fear, now held something else. Curiosity. Hope. But outside Medbay 3, the world grew colder. Command refused to grant Lyra refugee status. No legal protection, they said. Kalari are not recognized under current interstellar accords. Papers were filed. Denial stamped in red ink. She was labeled unauthorized presence and potential security risk. Elias tried to appeal. He wrote reports, he begged. He even contacted a human rights officer on a nearby station. But nothing changed. Worse, rumors spread. Some soldiers claimed the Kalari could control minds, that they used their glowing skin to hypnotize people, that Lyra was dangerous. One night, Elias found graffiti on the wall outside Medbay 3. Go home, ghost. Another time, someone left a dead rat at the door. He cleaned it up without a word. Then he sat with Lyra longer that night, drawing pictures of earth flowers until she fell asleep. She noticed the change in him. One evening she touched his cheek, rough with stubble, and made a soft sound almost like a question. I'm okay, he said, though he wasn't. She shook her head. Then she drew something new in her sketchpad. A tall figure in a uniform, standing alone in the rain, holding an umbrella over a small figure with silver skin. Above them she wrote 2 words in shaky earth letters. You stay. Elias felt his throat tighten. He nodded. I stay. But he knew it couldn't last. Then came the order. It arrived on a crisp morning, delivered by a stone-faced officer. Lyra was to be transferred to detention facility Gamma 9, an off-world prison camp for non-registered non-humans. The transport ship would arrive in 48 hours. Elias read the order 3 times. His hands shook. He went straight to command. She's just a child, he said. She's done nothing wrong. Rules are rules, Corporal, the officer replied, not looking up from his screen. She's not human. She's not protected. We can't keep her here. What will happen to her there? Elias asked. The officer finally met his eyes. That's not your concern, but Elias knew. Everyone knew. Gamma 9 wasn't a shelter. It was a black site. People, aliens, disappeared there. Never heard from again. That night he sat with Lyra as usual. She was drawing again, humming softly. He watched her fingers move across the page, so sure, so alive. He thought of his sister again. How he'd been too young, too weak to save her. He wouldn't fail this time. Lyra, he said gently. She looked up. He pointed to her pendant, the broken twin moon charm she never took off. What is this? She touched it carefully. Then she opened it. Inside was a tiny chip, glowing faintly blue. She placed it in his palm and closed his fingers around it. Her eyes were serious now. Not scared, determined. He didn't understand. But he knew one thing. This was important. Later, base intelligence intercepted a coded message. It mentioned Lyra by name, said she carried proof of war crimes committed by the Vexian Coalition, the group that had destroyed her homeworld. Proof that could change everything, and they wanted her silenced. Elias sat alone in the dark after curfew, the pendant in his hand, Lyra's drawings spread on his bunk. Outside, the wind howled. The storm was coming. He thought about his duty, his orders, his career. Then he thought about Lyra's hand in his, her quiet trust, her drawings of 2 figures under one umbrella. He made his choice. At 300 hours, he packed a small bag, rations, water, med kit, sidearm, extra ammo. He disabled the camera outside Medbay 3 with a magnet from his toolkit. Then he unlocked the door. Lyra was awake as if she'd been waiting. She didn't ask questions. She just stood, took his hand, and followed him into the shadows. They slipped past the sleeping guards, past the drone patrols, past the gates of the only safe place she'd known. Behind them, the base slept. Ahead, the wastelands of Vezran 7 stretched dark and endless, but for the first time they were together, and that was enough. The desert outside Base Thorn swallowed them whole. Cold wind bit through their clothes. Dust stung their eyes. Above, the sky was black with storm clouds, lit now and then by distant lightning. Elias walked fast, one hand gripping his rifle, the other holding Lyra's small, cold fingers. She limped beside him, her crutch tapping softly against the rock. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say. They were running now, away from safety, away from rules, away from everything Elias had ever known. He had planned as best he could. A route through the old mining tunnels, a hidden cache of emergency supplies near the dry ridge. But plans meant little out here. The wilds of Vesrin 7 were cruel. Few who entered ever came back. For 2 days they moved only at night. By day they hid in caves or under broken ship hulls wrapped in the thermal blanket. Lyra stayed quiet, watching the sky, listening to sounds Elias couldn't hear. Sometimes she'd touch the ground and whisper words he didn't understand. Once she stopped him just before he stepped on a patch of thin crust. Under it was a deep sinkhole. She saved his life without saying a word. They shared rations. 1 protein bar split in half. 1 sip of water each. Elias gave her the bigger pieces. She always tried to give some back. On the 3rd night, Lyra grew feverish. Her silver skin turned dull. The blue lines along her arms flickered weakly, like a dying light. She shivered even under the blanket. Elias checked her leg. The old injury was swollen red. Infection. He cleaned it with the last of his antiseptic, gave her a painkiller from his med kit, held her as she trembled. "Just hold on," he whispered. "We're close." She nodded, eyes half closed, but squeezed his hand. By dawn, the fever broke. She drank water slowly and managed a weak smile. That morning, for the first time, she spoke a full sentence in Earth words. "We find safe place?" Elias nodded. Yes, soon. He didn't know if it was true, but he needed her to believe it. They reached the dry ridge by midday, just as the storm hit. Rain wasn't water here. It was acid-tinged and sharp, eating at metal and flesh alike. They scrambled into a narrow canyon, pressing themselves against the stone wall. Elias pulled the blanket over them both. Lyra coughed. Her breathing was rough. He held her close, shielding her with his body. The wind screamed. Rocks tumbled down the cliffs. For hours they waited. When the storm passed, the air smelled burnt and clean, and there, half buried in the mud, was what Elias had hoped for. The entrance to an old Kalari observatory. It was small, dome-shaped, built into the rock. The door was sealed, but Lyra touched a symbol on the wall, a twin moon, and it opened with a soft hiss. Inside, it was dry and quiet. Dust covered everything, but the walls were lined with star maps, glowing faintly in the dark. Ancient writing curved along the ceiling. Lyra's eyes widened. She stepped forward slowly, as if entering a temple. "This, my people," she whispered. She ran her fingers over the carvings. Then she turned to Elias, her face bright with something he hadn't seen before. Joy. "Safe," she said. "We safe now." For a few days they rested. Elias rationed their food. Lyra explored the observatory, finding hidden panels, old tools, even a working water purifier. She showed him how to read the star maps, how certain constellations pointed to safe worlds, neutral zones, places where Kalari might still be welcome. One night, she took the broken pendant from around her neck. She placed it on a stone pedestal in the center of the room. Light poured from it, blue, bright, alive. Symbols floated in the air like ghostly writing. Elias watched, stunned. Lyra pointed to the images. "My father. He hid truth here." She touched a symbol that looked like a burning city. "Vexians. Kill my family. Lie to galaxy." Then she pointed to a string of numbers and letters. "This ship code. Proof." Elias understood. The pendant wasn't just a keepsake. It was a key, a record of war crimes, and it could change everything. But as hope grew, danger followed. On the 5th night, Elias heard it, a low hum in the distance. Not wind, not animals, a hovercraft. He grabbed his rifle and peered through a crack in the dome. Far below, a dark shape moved across the canyon floor. Single rider, no earth markings. No Kalari symbols either, just a black suit and a long-barreled rifle. A bounty hunter, someone had tracked them. "Lyra," Elias whispered. "We have to go now." She didn't argue. She grabbed the pendant, tucked it into her tunic, and followed him to the back of the observatory. There was a tunnel, narrow, dark, leading deep into the mountain. They crawled for what felt like hours. The air grew thin. Lyra's breathing grew louder. Elias's leg ached from the cold. Finally, they reached a dead end, a small chamber with a rusted hatch. Elias pried it open. Cold night air rushed in. They climbed out onto a high ledge. Below, the canyon stretched wide and empty. But the hunter was closer now. His hovercraft light swept the cliffs. Elias pulled Lyra behind a rock. "Stay down," he whispered. She nodded, eyes wide. The hunter stepped out of his craft. Tall, armored, face hidden behind a black mask. He moved like a shadow, scanning the rocks with a scanner in his hand. It beeped faintly but clearly. It was picking up the pendant's signal. He was coming straight for them. Elias raised his rifle. He had 6 shots. One chance. The hunter climbed the slope, slow and sure. 10 meters away, 5. Elias fired. The shot echoed like thunder. The hunter staggered but didn't fall. His armor had stopped the bullet. He turned fast and raised his own weapon. Elias shoved Lyra behind him. "Run," he shouted, but Lyra didn't run. She grabbed a loose rock and hurled it at the hunter's head. It struck his visor with a crack. He stumbled. Elias fired again. This time the shot hit the hunter's shoulder. He dropped his rifle, but he wasn't done. He lunged. Elias met him head on. They crashed to the ground, rolling in the dust. The hunter was strong. He pinned Elias down, one hand reaching for a knife at his belt. Lyra screamed. Then she did something unexpected. She pressed her palm against the hunter's chest, right over his heart. Her blue lines flared bright, so bright they lit up the whole ledge. The hunter froze. His eyes went wide. Then he collapsed, twitching as if his body had shut down. Elias gasped, pushing the man off. He checked for a pulse. There was none. Lyra fell to her knees, trembling. Her glow faded fast. She looked drained, pale. What did you do?" Elias asked, helping her up. She shook her head. "Kilari
Can share life.
or stop it." Her voice was weak, only in great need. She had used her own life force to stop the hunter's heart. Elias held her close. "You saved us," but she was barely awake. Her breathing was shallow. He knew they couldn't stay. The shot would bring more hunters, maybe even military drones. He lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than before. "Where do we go?" he whispered. She pointed weakly toward the eastern stars. "Sanctuary world." "Lyra 5, neutral, safe," he nodded. "Then that's where we go." He carried her down the mountain, past the dead hunter, past the broken hovercraft. The night was quiet again, but Elias knew peace wouldn't last. They had the truth now. And truth was dangerous, but as he walked, Lyra's head resting on his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. He wasn't just a soldier anymore, he was her protector, and he would get her to safety, even if it cost him everything. The days after the fight blurred together. Elias walked east, following the stars Lyra had shown him. She slept most of the time, curled against his chest, her breathing slow and shallow. Her silver skin had lost its shine. The blue lines on her arms barely glowed at all. She was fading. He rationed their last food, half a protein bar, a few sips of water each day. He talked to her as he walked, telling her stories of Earth, green fields, oceans that went on forever, his mother's garden full of red flowers. He didn't know if she heard him, but he kept talking anyway. On the 3rd morning, she woke long enough to drink water and whisper, "Not far." He didn't know if she meant the sanctuary world or just the next ridge, but he held on to those words like a promise. The land grew rougher. Deep cracks split the ground. Strange rock formations rose like broken teeth. At night, strange lights flickered in the distance, maybe gas vents, maybe something else. Elias kept moving. Stopping meant dying. Then on the 5th day, Lyra grew worse. Her skin turned cold. Her pulse was weak. She mumbled in her own language, calling for someone. Mara. Names Elias didn't know. Her fingers clutched his sleeve like she was afraid he'd vanish. He found a shallow cave under an overhang and laid her down gently. He checked her leg. The old injury was swollen again. Infection had spread. He had no medicine left. No clean bandages, nothing. He sat beside her, holding her hand. "Stay with me, Lyra," he said, voice breaking. "Just a little longer." She opened her eyes. They were dull, but she looked at him. "You, good human," she whispered. Then she closed her eyes again. Elias felt panic rise in his chest. He couldn't lose her. Not after everything. Not when they were so close. He remembered the observatory, the star maps, the coordinates in the pendant. If they couldn't reach Lyra 5 on foot, maybe they didn't have to. He searched the cave. Nothing. But then he remembered. The Hunter's hovercraft. It was still at the base of the cliff. Damaged maybe, but possibly still working. He made a decision. "I'll be right back," he told Lyra, though she was too weak to answer. He ran back through the canyon, heart pounding. The hovercraft sat where it fell, one side crushed, but the engine hummed faintly when he pressed the start panel. It was low on fuel, but it might last long enough. He dragged the dead Hunter's body away and cleaned the seat. Then he raced back to the cave, lifted Lyra as gently as he could, and carried her to the craft. She barely stirred as he strapped her in. The hovercraft lifted off with a groan. Elias steered it east toward the coordinates Lyra had given him. The wind howled. The fuel gauge dropped fast. After an hour, the craft sputtered, then died. They were still miles from the signal point, but closer than before. Elias carried Lyra again, this time with new hope. He saw it soon, a tall stone tower half buried in sand. The old Kalari comms array Lyra had mentioned. It was damaged, but parts still worked. He laid her inside the tower, then searched the control room. Dust covered the panels, but one screen flickered to life when he pressed a button shaped like a star. Lyra stirred. "The pendant," she whispered. He took it from her tunic and placed it in a slot on the console. Light filled the room. Symbols scrolled across the screen. A message began to form. Images of burning cities, lists of names, recordings of Vexian officers giving orders to kill civilians. It was all there. "The truth, can we send it?" Elias asked. Lyra nodded weakly. "Neutral channels. Open frequency." With shaking hands, Elias found the broadcast setting. He typed in the code Lyra whispered. Then he pressed send. A red light blinked. Transmitting. It would take minutes, maybe hours, but it was out there now. To news stations, to diplomats, to anyone who would listen. Outside, the sky darkened. Engines roared in the distance, more hunters. Or worse, Vexian scouts. Elias grabbed his rifle. "Stay here," he said, but Lyra grabbed his arm. "No," she said. "Together." He helped her sit up. She leaned against the console, eyes fixed on the screen. The red light kept blinking. Transmitting. The sound of boots echoed outside. Shouts in a harsh, guttural language, Vexian. Elias stepped to the doorway, rifle raised. 3 soldiers in black armor approached, weapons ready. "Drop your weapon, human," one shouted. Elias didn't move. "This girl has done nothing wrong. She carries stolen data," the soldier said. "Hand her over or die." Elias knew he couldn't win. 3 against 1, low ammo, no backup, but he also knew he couldn't let them take her. He fired. The first shot hit the lead soldier in the chest. The man fell. The other 2 returned fire. Bullets sparked off the stone walls. Elias ducked back inside. Lyra was still at the console. The red light blinked faster. "Transmission complete." "It's done," she whispered. Elias smiled. Good, then he did something unexpected. He threw his rifle out the door. Raised his hands. The 2 soldiers stepped inside, guns pointed at him. "Smart choice," one sneered. But as they moved toward Lyra, Elias lunged, not at them, but at the console. He slammed his fist on a red button Lyra had pointed to days ago. The tower shook. A deep hum filled the air. "What did you do?" the soldier shouted. "Gave you a show," Elias said. Outside, the old comms array, long thought dead, flared to life. A beam of light shot into the sky, bright enough to be seen from orbit. A signal flare, a beacon. Any ship in range would see it. Any rescue team. Any news drone. The soldiers panicked. They grabbed Lyra, but she twisted free and pressed her palm to the wall. The blue lines on her skin flared one last time. The tower light surged. Sparks flew. The soldiers cried out as their weapons shorted out. Elias tackled one. The other turned to run, but tripped over debris and hit his head on stone. He didn't get up. Silence fell. Elias crawled back to Lyra. She was pale, barely breathing. "You did it," he whispered. She smiled faintly. "You did it." Then her eyes closed. Elias held her, heart breaking. He thought she was gone, but then engines. Not Vexian. Smooth, quiet, human-made. A ship descended from the clouds, white and silver, marked with the symbol of the Interstellar Aid Coalition. Medics rushed out. They took Lyra gently, placing her on a stretcher, hooking her to machines that beeped with life. One medic looked at Elias. "You're the one who sent the broadcast?" He nodded. "You just changed the war," the medic said. But Elias didn't care about that. He only cared about the small hand that reached for his as they loaded Lyra onto the ship. He climbed in beside her. As the ship rose into the sky, leaving Vezrin 7 behind, Lyra opened her eyes again. Just for a moment, she looked at Elias and whispered, "Thank you." He held her hand all the way to safety. The ship that carried them away from Vezrin 7 was clean, quiet, and full of light. No dust, no blood, no fear. Lyra lay on a medical bed, tubes in her arms, machines humming softly around her. Elias sat beside her, still in his torn uniform, his boots still covered in gray dust. He hadn't slept in days, but he wouldn't leave her side. Doctors came and went. They spoke in low voices about miraculous recovery and unknown bioenergy. They ran tests, gave her nutrients, and watched in awe as the blue lines on her skin slowly returned to life. She was healing, not just her body but her spirit. The broadcast had done more than anyone expected. Within hours, news stations across human and non-human worlds played the footage from the pendant. Images of burning Kalari cities, recordings of Vexian officers ordering the killing of scholars, children, entire families. The truth was out. Protests erupted on Earth. Diplomats demanded action. The United Earth Council reversed its stance. The Kalari were granted emergency refugee status. Detention facility Gamma 9 was shut down, and the Vexian coalition faced sanctions from every neutral system in the galaxy. Elias was called to testify. At first, they wanted to court-martial him for desertion, for disobeying orders, for stealing military equipment. But when Lyra spoke, clear, strong, and calm, everything changed. She stood before the council, small but steady, and told her story. How her family had been scientists, not soldiers. How they had tried to warn the galaxy about the Vexians. How she had been the only one to escape. And how a human soldier, Corporal Elias Rourke, had saved her life when no one else would. "He saw me," she said, voice clear. "Not an alien. Not a threat. Just a child who needed help." The council was silent. Then, one by one, they stood and applauded. Elias was cleared of all charges. Not just cleared, he was honored. Given a medal he didn't want, but accepted for her sake. He left the military soon after, not because he was asked to, but because he no longer believed in blind orders. He believed in people. Lyra was taken to a safe world, Lyra 5, just as she had hoped. It was green and warm, with twin suns and oceans that shimmered like her skin. Other Kalari refugees lived there, elders who remembered her family, children who drew stars just like she did, but she never forgot Elias. For years they wrote letters. Simple ones at first, "I am well. The trees here are tall." Then longer ones, stories, questions, dreams. Elias worked with a refugee aid group, helping displaced families from all species find homes. Lyra studied diplomacy, history, and interstellar law. She wanted to make sure no one else would be forgotten like she almost was. 10 years passed. On a bright morning on Earth, in a quiet park near the old capital, a crowd gathered. A new memorial was being unveiled, the Forgotten of Vezrin 7. A stone wall with hundreds of names carved into it. Kalari names, human names, names of others who had died in the shadows of war. Elias stood near the front, older now, hair gray at the temples but eyes still kind. He wore a simple coat, no medals, no uniform. Then he saw her. Lyra walked toward him, tall and graceful, her silver skin glowing softly in the sunlight. She wore a long blue robe, the symbol of a Kalari diplomat. Her hair was braided with tiny stars. She looked like the girl he'd found in the wreckage, but stronger, wiser. She stopped in front of him. For a moment, they just looked at each other. No words needed. Then she smiled. "You came." "I said I would," he replied. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small pendant. The twin moons, now fully repaired, shining with soft light. She stepped closer and placed it around his neck. "You were my first human," she said quietly. "I will never forget you." Elias touched the pendant. It was warm. "And you were my first friend," he said. Reporters took pictures. Crowds cheered. But in that moment it was just the two of them. Soldier and girl, human and Kailari, bound by a choice made in the dust of a dead moon. Later, during the ceremony, Lyra spoke to the crowd. She talked about loss, about silence, about what happens when the world looks away. But she also talked about courage, about one man who chose kindness when it was easier to walk away. "He didn't save just me," she said, glancing at Elias. "He reminded us all what it means to be human." After the speeches, they walked together through the park. Children played nearby. Birds sang in the trees, real birds, not drones or machines. "Do you ever miss it?" Lyra asked. "The stars, the quiet of space?" Elias looked up at the sky even though it was daytime. "Sometimes. But I like it here, where people plant gardens, where kids laugh, where no one has to run." Lyra nodded. "Me too." They sat on a bench under a flowering tree. Petals drifted down around them. "I visit the refugee centers," she said. "I tell them your story. The children always ask, 'Was he really alone?' And I say yes, but he chose to stand with me anyway." Elias smiled. "You gave me more than I gave you." "No," she said firmly. "You gave me my life, my voice, my future." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The sun warmed their faces. The world felt calm. Later, as the sun began to set, Lyra stood to leave. Her ship would return to Lyra 5 that night. "Will I see you again?" Elias asked. She turned and looked at him, eyes full of stars. Always, and she meant it because their story wasn't over. It had just become part of something bigger, a bridge between worlds, built not with metal or laws, but with one act of kindness in a broken place. Years later, old men and women would tell their grandchildren about the soldier and the alien girl, about how in a time of fear and silence, one human chose to care and changed everything. And in a quiet house on Earth, an old man would sit on his porch, wearing a twin moon pendant, watching the stars, knowing that somewhere out there a friend was doing the same. They had stood alone once, but they were never alone again.